Here we go. We are in our first paper of this news hound. So I'd only have to go to the British News Archives for this. And there's his face. Hod Dibben, it's hard to see. He's got the print coming through. Page 2, The People, Sunday, September the 3rd, 1961. And 4 articles got published in this series by Hod Dibben. This one is called, and I'll have to skip to the next one. This was called, here you go, Slave of Satan. So that's the next page. So they're double-paged, double-spread articles. And it says, Amazing Confessions of a British Officer. What is the truth about black magic? Can we afford to laugh off the persistent, sinister tales of weird ceremonies all over Britain? One man has decided time has come to utter the solemn warning to anyone tempted to join these loathsome practices for fun or curiosity. He knows the terrible consequences, for once he was embroiled in a terrible cult himself, and still bears the scars on mind and body. By Hod Dibben. Strange things have been happening in Britain over the last few months. Weird ceremonies in deserted woods, graves opened at dead of night, dolls' heads stuck with pins sent through the post. Sinister or comical, the evidence of a horrible cult at work, or just childish mumbo-jumbo? Well, most people laugh when they read of such incidents and dismiss black magic as the work of a set of cranks who should learn to grow up. I know better than to laugh. Whenever I hear the other examples of this horrible cult in operation, I'm filled with a thick horror. There was a case of that wretched man from Ceylon who nearly drowned himself after a curse laid on him by black magic practitioners in London. There was that West End dancer who lured to a black who was lured to a black magic ceremony and forced to watch an obscene ceremony in which a naked girl was tied to an altar. There was that man in Birmingham who went mad after taking part in a lewd ceremony. It has horrified me to read of all these incidents. It has appalled me to see how the dreadful cult of the devil worship is spreading like a disease to every corner of this island, or these islands. I know only too well the depravity, the obscenity, the degradation of the practice of black magic. I know that the cult has only one end: spiritual, mental, and physical ruination. I know, for I was a slave of Satan. Once I was prepared to take part in any depravity to please the devil, my master. Looking back with shame and revulsion on that part of my life, it is hard to realize how fanatical I was. I regarded honesty, faithfulness, and purity as despicable. Now, he's talking about a 2-year period where he's saying he had managed to find honesty, faithfulness, and purity is despicable. Before, of course, he didn't, and afterwards he didn't. Not sure. A lot of this, as you see, is bombast. Of course it is. It's Hod Dibben. Death threat. Obscenity and sexual depravity were qualities to be admired, yet somehow I came to my senses in time and shook off the mantle of evil. It was not easy to do so, for in repudiating the black art, I risked the vengeance of its leaders, and for 15 years the threat of death has followed me. I know that it is fervent desire of the leaders of black magic in Britain today to silence me forever, but silent I cannot be. In the light of the recent evidence of sinister practices in Britain, I feel I must utter my solemn warning of the terrible consequences that may befall anyone who is tempted, for kicks or curiosity, to dabble in the black arts. The disclosure of this horrible chapter of my life may shock the people who know me as one of England's respected gentry and a leading expert on antiques and art. just as they were shocked recently to hear that my beautiful 19-year-old wife, Mariella, had been named in a vice investigation in New York after being associated with TV producer Harry Allen Towers. She was innocent, of course, and we are now starting life afresh in a new flat near Marble Arch, which seems another good reason for making a clean breast once and for all of all this sordid side of my life. In making my confessions, I threw myself on the understanding of my family and hope that they will forgive. The upbringing they gave me was everything one could expect from a wealthy county family. It may be, however, that my father was a little too strict with me as a devout member of the Plymouth Brethren. He enforced the strictest discipline in his household. Each morning he presided over prayers, which were attended by our staff of 14 servants. Every night we had to be in bed before 9. My father hammered into me the idea that sex was something unsavory and bad to be avoided by all decent people. Girls galore. I think it was this strict, straight-laced atmosphere at home which made me glad when the war came and I joined the RAF. At once I felt a different man, reveling in my new freedom. As a young flying officer, I had girls galore ready to fall at my feet, and I took an intense delight in scorning all my father's strict warnings. Looking back, I think Satan caught me on the rebound. I was in the mood ripe for his temptations. It was at this time that I was posted to a camp on the Orkneys. It was bleak, remote, cold, but within 2 days of my arrival at the camp, a remarkable incident occurred. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by the sound of my window being opened. I could see no one there, but on the windowsill was a bird's nest with an egg in it. I touched the egg, and it was still warm. Then, to my horror, I found blood on my finger. Looking at the egg again, I saw that a swastika was drawn on it in blood, still wet. Next morning, I went to report the incident to my CO, leaving the nest on a table in my room. On the way to the CO's office, I had to pass the window of my room. Out of curiosity, I looked in at the mysterious nest and egg. They had vanished. An explanation was beyond me. I had left the room locked. By now, I was really frightened. That night, I was lying on my bed reading when there was a knock at the door. In walked a beautiful redhead. I guessed immediately she was a member of the concert party that had arrived that afternoon. She smiled sweetly at me, sat down on my bed, and said, "You were expecting me, weren't you? Perhaps you were, without realizing it." Indignantly, I asked her to leave my room at once. "Certainly," she said. "I will see you at the Black Croft at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning." Next day was Sunday, and after breakfast I decided to go for a walk. I had almost forgotten my visitor of the previous evening. I walked for 3 hours, heading for a hotel where I could have lunch. At last, a hotel came into my sight as I walked over the hill crest, but something else caught my eye beside the wood nearby, a black croft. An uncanny feeling overwhelmed me. Automatically, I walked towards the croft, where, when I was within a few feet of the croft, the door opened, and there was the wet redhead waiting for me. She led me into the darkened interior. After a few seconds, I was able to make out the shadowy figures of 10 people sitting in the middle of the floor. They were dressed in long white robes and pointed hats with slits for their eyes and mouths. The girl threw me. I can just stop there and have a look at this picture. Evil leaves its mark. Can't see what the picture is, it's too blurry. On Hod Dibben's leg, he can still be seen an arrow-shaped saw where he was branded by devil worshippers with a red-hot iron. Well, I suppose that must be it round by there. Here you go. And just in case this story scares you, you get Nervoin for nerve pain. There you go. The girl threw me similar garb, and without hesitation, I put it on and sat in the circle. By now, my fear was being replaced by a strange fascination. One of the men leaped forward, and from beneath his cloak he pulled a white cockle, which he handed to the girl. She swiftly drew a knife across its throat, killing it instantly. Holding the bird aloft, she allowed the blood to trickle over her. Every part of my body trembled. I knew this was black magic ritual, but how did I fit in? By what token had I qualified to join this weird gathering? Hanging. There was no time for further thought. Two other ghostly figures leaped up, bound the girl by her ankles, and suspended her from the beam in the roof. Not a word was spoken. The girl moved slightly to and fro, eyes closed, arms outstretched. After about 5 minutes, her lips parted. By all that is in putrefaction, we bid welcome to our new brother, she said. He is our number 11. The god of fire and stone demands his acceptance of the all-embracing brotherhood of evil. I sat transfixed as the entranced girl uttered the most dire warnings of what would overcome me if I dared to renounce the brotherhood. Business disasters, the death of my best friend in a car crash, the loss of my home, banishment from my father's will, and finally dissection of my person to whom I was devoted. Eventually, I did renounce the brotherhood of Satan, and all those tragic happenings came true. We both left the barn singly. As number 11, I was last apart from the girl. I walked with her back to the camp. I asked her name. In the circle, I am known as Sarah, the goddess of desire, she said simply. Then she added, you were chosen to join the circle because you have qualities we seek, and because of your name, Hod. In our faith, Hod means the Eternal One, and we knew you could give us every lasting joy. As we parted, she said, your initiation will be arranged for July the 4th, when the Earth is at its greatest distance from the Sun. I saw the girl frequently at the camp during the next few weeks, but she never gave any sign of recognition when we met. My instinct told me that the matter had gone far enough. It was ridiculous, disgraceful that a person of such respectable family background as myself could become involved in a loathsome practice of black magic. But I knew that I had gone too far to back out now. Also, I must be perfectly frank and admit that I wanted to continue. I felt an exhilaration I had never experienced before. I began to look forward to the initiation. As each day passed, I waited eagerly for the summons. At last it came, in the form of the message I found in my shoe one morning, calling me to the altar of acceptance at sundown on July the 4th. I arrived at the Blackcroft at the appointed hour to find everybody in their places. In the center of the circle sat Cicera, her golden red hair glinting by the light of a small fire. The silence was broken by the chanting of the girl. The symbols of the opposites shall become as one, and all power to our father Satan. For those sitting in the circle around her repeated the last words, and all power to the father Satan. It was sung with the same monotone that the priest uses in church, but there was nothing Christian about the disgusting ceremony in which I was about to take part. My clothes were ripped. Ooh, that sounds exciting. Let's get to the top. My clothes were ripped from me and flung into the corner. I stood facing Cicera, who also began to take off her clothes. 3 huge wooden trays were placed between her and myself. On the first was the head of a newly killed ewe. The rest of it remains so piled on the other two trays. The rest of its remains were piled on the other two trays. The most barbaric and bestial ceremony followed, in which all human senses were degraded. The ceremony lasted several minutes, at each stage progressively more horrible. The circled members jumped to their feet and cried out, "All power to Satan, the master of all!" At last it was over, at least so far as my actual initiation was concerned. As I flopped face down in the corner of the barn, defiled and ashamed, I heard the others pull off their robes, but leaving their hoods intact, and begin an orgy which lasted until dawn. There were men and women members of about equal numbers, and they gave vent to their most outrageous expressions of lewdness that is possible to imagine. But I was mistaken if I thought I had been forgotten. As dawn approached, I was pushed into a crazed mob and forced to take part in further indignities, which culminated in the rites of the elders. My hands and legs were tied, and two people placed their hands tightly over my eyes. Then I heard the cry, "Do you submit in brotherhood?" I murmured a feeble "yes," and at once I felt an excruciating pain on my right thigh, followed by the smell of scorched flesh. I was released, and in the light of dawn, which was creeping through the cracks of the roof, I saw that my leg had been branded with a hot arrowhead. It is a mark that I bear to this day, the mark of horror and shame that can never be erased, although I have long since renounced these loathsome cults. I am left with a constant reminder of my service to Satan. After my initiation, I entered wholeheartedly into the affairs of the circle. These consisted mainly of meetings in the barn, about one a month, which were little more than an excuse for orgy making. Each meeting was preceded by a ceremony in which due respect was paid to the devil, and a period of confession during which each member was asked to give details of his conduct. If anybody had been guilty of performing a good deed, there were shouts of "Traitor to our Lord and Master!" But confessions of wrongdoing of any kind were greeted with murmurs of approval. At the end of the confessional, before yet another bout of pleasure-seeking, there were wild shouts of "All praise to the holiness that comes from the bad." In all these activities I took the fullest part. To my everlasting shame, I have to record that I entered into the spirit of evil and obscenity with the utmost vigor and with no sense of guilt. This went on for nearly 2 years. Of course, the girl, Cicera, had left with the concert party after a few months, but she often returned to the circle for an event of special significance. Such an event was a human sacrifice on the day of last reckoning, which is at the end of the black magic year of activity, just before the approach of winter. I did not seriously believe it would be a human sacrifice in the true sense. I imagined it would be arranged symbolically, like so much of devil worship. I soon learned how wrong I was, and the fiendish rite in which I participated on the day in 1944 was so sickening, so barbaric, that at last it jolted me to my senses and made me resolve to forsake my life of evil. There before us, on the hill outside Orkney village of Twat, was the naked, frightened figure of a pitiful young girl, bound tightly to a withered tree trunk. Facing her, a few yards away, was an enraged ram, its nostrils quivering, its whole body straining against the rope that tethered it. One of the circle held a knife poised over the rope. The scene of utter bestial horror that followed is something that I could not erase from my mind in a million years. Wow. So there you go. That ceremony took place on a hillside outside the Orkney village of Twat. Oh, Hod. And it says up here, no, a young girl lies bound before the altar dedicated to the glorification of evil in its most loathsome form. It was into such a rite that Hod Dibben, as an RAF officer, suddenly and strangely found himself drawn. So there you go. That's the first part of this article, if it can be called an article. Next week, I try to escape from the devil, but death strikes twice. Uh-oh. An escape from the devil. Doesn't sound easy to do. And there's a little. So this first episode, and it's incredible, really, to see. This was in the People magazine, which is a Sunday version of the Mirror back in the day. Now it's Sunday Mirror, and maybe the People is still going. I don't know. They might have finished it along, like they did with News of the World, like big giant paper companies rebrand themselves when they do too much illegal stuff. And this was on Sunday, September the 3rd, 1961. It wasn't hidden away in the paper. This was page 2. And there is Hod Dibben, married to Mariella Novotny, who is one of the most interesting people in history. And that is the first part of his series in these newspapers. As you see, there's someone there taking the rights. Oh my God, this is despicable. And amazingly, this guy, who's massively intelligently linked, is talking about how he became a Satanist. And this is just after, as you heard in here, this is just after, shall we quote him? Just as they were shocked recently to hear that my beautiful 19-year-old wife, Mariella, had been named in a vice investigation in New York after being associated with TV producer Harry Allen Towers. And it's extremely interesting, but that's the first of them. And so it's really important. We're going to read 4 of these. And I think this is seeding the satanic panic narrative. This was one of the many people who were chosen by intelligence to seed this satanic panic narrative into the media. And the media, especially the people in the Mirror newspaper, loved covering Hod Dibben and Mariella Novotny. There was many different times where they covered them and their bizarre exploits. And we'll read the second part soon. This is fun. Of course, there's a lot more to this, and the articles you get to see the other side, what was actually happening at the same time. So that's Black Hand. And that's really about the rise of or the merger between gangsters and intelligence operatives from the British side and merging into the American side, and then basically eventually working together to become the same thing, where originally a lot of this was about competition. They were competing with each other, which you will also see within the series. I hope you enjoyed that. Let's come off this. Stop the chair. Right, I hope you enjoyed that. That's a sneak peek into the world of Hod Dibben, and we'll do another one soon. We'll do all of these articles. We'll go through each of these articles, and we'll then look at some of the people who were involved as side characters. So I hope you enjoyed that. It's been Fungi Monkey. And of course, NEWSHOUND special edition, special Hod Dibben edition.
What we know is that we will end up with many more unemployed